Good afternoon. So I know when people hear that you work at the Happiness Research Institute, they imagine that our office looks somewhat like this. Unfortunately, that's not the case, only on Fridays. Most of the time, it looks like this. So we look at numbers, we look at data, we look at studies, and we try to have a scientific approach to happiness and well-being. And basically, all the work we do and my entire career is dedicated to trying to understand how we can measure happiness, why some people are happier than others, and what we can do to improve quality of life. And also what I'll try to give you an insight to into the next 20 minutes. And it's also a really, really exciting time to be a happiness researcher, because more than a decade ago, the UN passed a happiness resolution, so asking all the countries of the world to focus more on happiness and well-being and see what they can do to improve quality of life for mankind. They also have an International Day of Happiness. It's March 20th. And every year the UN puts out a World Happiness Report where you can see the latest findings in happiness research and also an overview of how happiness is developing around the world. And we're seeing countries also embrace these softer measures of progress. So I think in Europe, it's the UK that have gone the furthest. So every year there's a large UK survey where they can see where in the UK are people more or less happy. The lady on the top right is Uhud Al-Rumi. She was the first Minister of State for Happiness in the United Arab Emirates. So most of you know the United Arab Emirates. They're the 7th richest country in the world. They have the tallest building in the world, and now they want to be one of the 5 happiest countries. And of course, famously, Bhutan have been working with gross national happiness for the past 40, 50 years. So every political decision is based on, is this going to improve quality of life for our citizens? We also have the OECD developing Your Better Life Index. It's an index with 11 indicators, classic indicators like income, housing, education, but also softer ones like life satisfaction. And what is cool about this index is that you can go in and you can select which of these 11 indicators are more or less important to me. So in return, the OECD gets insight into what policy areas do people actually prioritize. And notice the color of life satisfaction orange. Across the board, when you look at countries, people prioritize life satisfaction as the top one. Typically then education or health. For South Korea, security is also important. But people care about life satisfaction. It's actually what they want as an outcome of policies. It also shows as a better measure of progress. So this is from an OECD report looking at which metrics could perhaps predict the Arab Spring we saw back in 2011. And if you looked at GDP indicators, things look like they're going fine. In Egypt, in Tunisia, you see an increase of roughly a third in GDP per capita. But if you look at the amount of people that feel that life is going well, that drops to a third in the same period. You also have cases like South Korea that have gone from this to one of the poorest nations on earth to one of the richest ones, but they're really struggling with converting that wealth into well-being. So actually, the country we get most visits from at the Happiness Research Institute is South Korea, because they want to understand how do we actually create better conditions for quality of life. We also see at the in the academic domain that more and more universities are actually holding courses or creating courses around happiness and well-being. For Yale and for Harvard, it's actually the biggest courses in the history of both universities. And to me, that's a testimony to the young generation, what they desire. And what they desire is to become happy. They want to know some skills in that sense. And I think it was more than 2,000 years ago, Aristotle said, happiness is the ultimate aim for human existence. And I think that's still true today. It's what we try to become. that brings me to the key question that I've spent 13 years trying to solve. How do we measure happiness? And I think people sometimes confuse impossible with difficult, because it is certainly difficult, but it's not impossible. One of the things that makes it difficult is that whether we talk about happiness or well-being or quality of life, all of those terms are wide umbrella terms. So Katie, who just introduced me, she will have one perspective on what happiness is or what the good life is. I will have another one. But I think what we need to do with umbrella terms and complex terms in general is to just break them apart and look at the individual parts they consist of. And it's actually an exercise we're quite used to, because if we were to talk about how is the Spanish economy doing, we would talk about unemployment rates, tariffs, interest rates, GDP per capita, and that gives us a language to talk about how's the Spanish economy doing. So that's also what we need to do with happiness. So the OECD recommends when you work with subjective well-being or happiness, you need to look at least 3 different dimensions. First of all, you need an overall life satisfaction. How satisfied are people with life? You can ask them questions like, imagine the best possible life you could live and the worst possible life you could live on a scale from 0 to 10. Where do you feel you stand right now? It's a very stable measure that is not influenced by what day of the week it is or whether the sun shines or not. Another dimension is called the affective one, and that has more to do with what kind of mood are people in. And that fluctuates a lot. So for example, take yesterday, how happy did you feel? That will vary a lot by day of the week. Unsurprisingly, people are happier on Fridays and Saturdays than they are on Mondays. So thank you, big data, for that nugget of wisdom. You can also see, of course, the 2 dimensions are linked, because if you have a lot of everydays with a lot of positive emotions, you're probably also more satisfied with life. But they're not one-to-one overlapping, because you can have a lousy day and still feel happy about your life overall. So I think the sort of broad view on the 2 dimensions is being happy about your life and being happy in your life. Not the same, but correlated. The 3rd dimension is called the eudaimonic dimension. It's just the ancient Greek word for happiness, so it's what Aristotle thought the good life was, and to him the good life was the meaningful life. So there you can look at whether people have a sense of purpose and meaning in life. So once you separate well-being into these 3 different domains, you can then start to see what factors impact what. And for example, you can see your relationships will have an impact on all 3 dimensions. Income is going to matter for life satisfaction, but not for your sense of purpose. Kids, great for sense of purpose, mixed results in the affective domain. Very stressed, very happy parents. But for example, take age. Do we have any people in the audience who's mid-40s? Yep, I have good news. Things are going to get better. Because if this is the global pattern. So if we take the global pattern, we see this U-shaped curve in roughly half of all countries. So people are very happy when they're young and quite happy later in life, but sort of mid-40s is the global low point. Difference from men and women and different from country to country. But this is the global picture we get. So we break happiness down. We look at the different components, and then we say, yes, happiness is subjective, because there's only one person who can tell us whether Katie is happy or not, and that is Katie. So we look at subjective emotions all the time. We look at stress, we look at anxiety, we look at depression. Happiness is the same. It's a subjective emotion about how do we as individuals experience our lives and the world around us. But I don't see it should be more difficult to try and understand a positive emotion compared to a negative one. And then thirdly, what we like to do is we like to look for change. Because if we just ask people to understand what's the effect on marriage, on happiness, for instance, if we ask you and 10,000 other people, are you married, and how happy are you, or how satisfied are you with life? We would see people who are in a relationship, people who are married, are on average happier than people who are single. But does that mean that we become happy from marriage, or is it the other way around, that those people that are happy have an easier time attracting a partner? So we can use the British Household Panel to understand that. They've followed people for more than a decade. And when you follow, let's say, 10,000 people over a decade, maybe 1,700 people get married. And here we have the results. So marriage happens in year 0, and you have 4 years before marriage and 4 years after marriage. And women are red, men are blue. And you can see 2 years before marriage happens, life satisfaction starts to go up. And I think that's because you meet your future wife or husband. You find out how much you have in common. You like impact investing. I like impact investing. And then you get married. And then it sort of peaks at just around marriage. But we can then see into the future with these data and say, those 1,700 people that did get married, they are actually happier also many years after marriage. But you can also go back in time and see those people that did get married in the course of this study, they actually also started out with a slightly higher levels of happiness. So both things are true in that causation. You can also use people's phones and harass them 1, 2, or 3 times per day, asking them, how happy are you right now? What are you doing? And you get this outcome, top 5 in terms of what activities brings most joy in the day-to-day dimension. Work, second least happy activity. Only worse is being homesick in bed. You can also harvest the GPS data, so you can see when people are in nature, they're happier than when they're in the city, and so on. So really good data on this as well. And then you can start to see, how does income impact happiness? And if you look at life satisfaction, we can see broadly, yes, richer people are happier than people with low incomes. But the main mechanism here is being without money is a cause of uncertainty, of stress, of worry, and unhappiness. So going from low income to mid-income, that really moves the needle in terms of life satisfaction. But going from low income to high income, yes, you become slightly happier, but not a lot. And with money, like with everything else, we see diminishing marginal returns, because the more you have of something, the less pleasure you get from it. So the first money you get, you buy a place to live, you buy food. If you're already making a lot of money and you get additional income, you buy weird stuff online. And not even a dog looks happier. There's also an added complexity with the relationship between money and happiness, and that is that we can see that people care about not only absolute income, but relative income. So how much money do I make compared to my reference group? So when you ask people this question, would you rather make 50,000 in a place or in a world where everybody else makes 25,000? The currency here doesn't matter. Or would you rather make 100,000 where everybody else makes 200,000? Roughly 50% of people will say, I want option A. Absolute less, but relative more. And I think it's the Americans that have a saying that sort of captures this quite well. And that is that a happy man is a man that makes $100 more than his wife's sister's husband. And we can see that in the data, that people care about their position in the socioeconomic hierarchy. We recently did a study with 122,000 Danes and how much they think other people make around them matters as much as how much money they make in absolute terms. Now, we know that what we measure matters, because if I look at my phone, how many steps I walk per day, I automatically start to walk more. And if I get on the scales every day, I maybe become more attentive to what I eat. So what we measure matters. And our point is that we should then measure what matters to people. And what matters to people is evidently happiness and well-being, because that's why they take the course at Harvard. That's why they take the course at Yale. And that's why people pick life satisfaction as the most important indicator of the Better Life Index at the OECD. And I think happiness also has the added value that it can become a tool into impact investing, because it provides this common currency that we can start to compare vastly different domains and technologies with. So imagine I came to you and said, you can choose between two pills. The red pill is a cure for Parkinson's disease, and the blue pill is the cure for chronic kidney diseases. So show of hands, how many would go for the Parkinson pill? And how many would go for the blue pill, chronic kidney disease? So, okay, 40% and 40% and 20% are like, I need more data on this, which is fair. But a few years ago, our good friends at Leaps by Bayer came to us with an even bigger question. They said to us, if we could cure one disease in the world, which disease should we pick if we're interested in improving quality of life the most for mankind? And we've been working on that answer for the past 7 years now, and it's gotten even bigger because we've started to compare not only between diseases in health, but also in agriculture. So some of the challenges that Leaps are trying to solve are curing genetic diseases, reducing the environmental impact from agriculture, or creating a sustainable protein supply. So vastly different areas, and we're putting happiness at the core of our model as a common currency to understand if we're able to achieve these scientific breakthroughs, what would actually matter the most for quality of life for mankind. Some of the data sets we're using to answer these questions, one of them is called SHARE, the Survey for Health, Aging and Retirement in Europe. It has, I think, 160,000 people in it, followed since 2002, and we're only focusing on seniors, so people who are 50, soon there, and above. And when you follow seniors, and when you follow 160,000 of them for more than 20 years, people are diagnosed with all sorts of diseases. So, for example, we have more than 1,800 people in our data set who are diagnosed with Parkinson in the course of this study. We use life satisfaction, and here we have a woman who's diagnosed with Parkinson in 2014, and in the years before she's diagnosed, she reports really high levels of life satisfaction, 10 or 9. Then she's diagnosed, and then it drops to a 5, her life satisfaction. The question becomes then, if she had not been diagnosed with Parkinson, what would her life satisfaction be? Is it a 10? Is it a 9? Is it an 8? And that's why age matters, and that's why her socioeconomic profile matters. We need to estimate what would her life be like if she's not diagnosed with Parkinson. That was just to give you an introduction to WALI, Well-Being Adjusted Life Years. That is the model that we've been developing together with Leaps by Bayer for the past 8 years. And if you want to take a deep dive into it and really understand the tools and methods that we can apply both within health but also agriculture, be sure to check out the session in the Beach Lounge in a few minutes. My awesome colleagues, Alejandro and Camilla, will be there together with our friends from Leaps by Bayer, Denise and Ricky, and really give you an insight into how can this be used in practice in impact investing. So I hope you enjoyed that session as well, but thank you so much for your attention.